Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. Hope you're having an amazing day. See what happens when you subscribe. You get a bonus greeting on every episode. On this episode, we talked to Elena Kohn, and she wrote this really cool book, Women in Law. And she has a really cool background coming out of the Soviet Union, which collapsed. And she talks about how coming from this lawless society where there wasn't accountability really gave her a yearning for something better. So I hope you enjoy her story. I hope it resonates with you, and I hope it gives you some encouragement to make your world and make what your definition for success is your own. You got one life to live. Make it as good as you can. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
All right, welcome to the Ethics Experts. How's it going?
Hi, Nick. It's so great to be invited to your podcast. It's going well. How are you?
Very good. So I want to dive in because I think you have a really interesting story. You grew up around the collapse of the Soviet Union, and your journey now has brought you to being a real leader in the legal and compliance space. You wrote this amazing book, which we'll get to in a second, but let's talk about what your childhood was like and what it was like growing up during that collapse.
Sure. Well, I was born in the Soviet Union, and I was only 10 years old when the Soviet Union collapsed. And so I vividly remember the chaos that ensued following the collapse of the Soviet Union. Specifically, there were shortages of food. Oftentimes, people didn't know whether or not they were going to have anything at all for lunch. And my parents had both been professionals working for a state plant. They were both engineers. My mom was a chemical engineer and my father was a aeronautical engineer. And so suddenly with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the government funding stopped for those facilities and they were without jobs. So they didn't have an income and they didn't have what to feed their family. And so that was extremely stressful for them.
Yeah.
I cannot even begin to imagine having having a family and small children and not knowing whether or not you'll have food for them. And I have two more siblings, so there were three of us at the time. And so that kind of system dysfunction also led to the collapse of the healthcare as it had existed before. And so my mother's breast cancer, as a result, wasn't timely diagnosed because the local hospital was chaotic and no one knew what they were doing anymore, and there was no funding and the equipment wasn't working and they didn't have the film for the x-ray machine. And so it wasn't timely diagnosed. And as a result of all of that, unfortunately, my mom passed away from cancer. She did talk to the hospital administrators at the time, asking them, why did you not diagnose? Why did you not have the x-ray film? And they were completely indifferent to her suffering. And growing up with that background really made me want to be a part of a law-abiding society where there is a rule of law, where there is justice, not to sound trite, but where people are held accountable for bad things that happen to, patients. And none of that happened in my mother's case, unfortunately. But you asked about my background growing up in the Soviet Union, and here it is. It's probably not a happy one, but it's a formative experience, and it gave me kind of a bigger purpose behind wanting to be an attorney and specifically working in healthcare sector.
Man, I mean, that experience during those formative years obviously made a huge impression on you, obviously laid the foundation for who you are today, your sense of justice and your sense of accountability, as you said. What else did you see? A lot of the things that you're talking about only can exist in stories for us who have lived in the United States their whole lives. And it's hard to really wrap our heads around chaos at a medical facility, or not being able to have food, or showing up to work and the doors are locked, or whatever those kind of entailments of that kind of a fallout are. So I appreciate you sharing that. But what else did you see, or what else did you notice about that time that helped contribute to this really strong sense of justice that guides you today?
Well,
I mean, there was a lot of corruption. I'm sure there was a ton of corruption, and there was a ton of corruption that led to this. You know what I mean?
Yes, I'm sure there was. And remember, I was only 10 years old when things like of that nature were happening. So I wasn't necessarily a contributing member of an adult
Right.
society. Um, but I will tell you, because of the nature of your podcast and what you talk about, I think in terms of compliance and having a culture of compliance, it's really incumbent upon every single person, every single individual to understand that compliance belongs to each and every one of us. Each and every one of us can make it better for our respective organizations, places of work, and that it's not necessarily a team sport, meaning just because several of us saw something and nobody's reporting it, I'm not going to report it either. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to reach out to my compliance officer and talk to them because it's upon me and we're all following the same mission and we want the same good thing happen for our organization. That type of mentality didn't exist in the Soviet Union where I was growing up because really it was a culture of everyone being the same, doing the same thing. Everybody had the same wallpaper in their apartments. Everybody had the same couches, the same kitchen cabinets. Honestly, you could go to your next door neighbor and not even realize you were at your next door neighbor's home because supply and demand didn't exist, and everybody just had the same exact thing. There's actually a cultural moment there. There's a movie that is like It's a Wonderful Life here in the US. The movie that is watched in Eastern Europe was called The Irony of Fortune. And it's about this man who goes to a sauna with his friends on New Year's Eve. And unfortunately, they have a couple of drinks and end up not knowing which of the friends is supposed to take a flight from Moscow to St. Petersburg that evening. And so they mistakenly send this man on that flight to St. Petersburg. And so he tells a Uber driver his address, he takes him there. The same street name exists, the same house number exists, the same apartment number, everything. And even his key works in the lock. So he goes in, the wallpaper is the same, the couch is the same, everything is the same. So he falls asleep in someone else's apartment in a totally different city without even realizing what had happened.
It's wild. But, I think you're right. That kind of leads to the apathy and the indifference that you described at the hospital that your mother faced with. It has to, right? It's like if we don't feel like we're participants in something, if we feel like we don't have any agency in the world we're living in or the country we're living in or the company we're living in, how can you not just be apathetic? It's just like a natural human response to something like that.
So insightful of you. And I think that's probably very much accurate. And also, if there is no sense of justice or
Exactly.
accountability, if there is no separation of powers, if the courts are not exercising independent judicial discretion, then you can't really hold people accountable. And the hospital administrators did tell my mom, they said, go ahead and sue us, realizing full well
Nice.
that nothing would come of it,
Yeah, that's crazy. All right. So the collapse happened. You found yourself in the United States. At what age were you here and what was that journey over here like? I bet there's a whole book you could write about that.
So it's not exactly a direct journey from the Soviet Union after the collapse to the United States. I went to college in London. And so I lived in England for about 7 years. And that's where my eldest son was born, in England. And so we only moved to the US in 2007.
So when you arrived in England, you arrived there for college, yeah?
Yes.
Yes. And so what struck you as what was your impression of that? Of living there, and to what extent did that society or that culture exhibit some of the things you yearned for or longed for during those formative years during the collapse?
Fantastic question. I will tell you that I feel like I have benefited from 3 different schools of thought in terms of education. I went to school in the Soviet Union and later it became Russia. And then I went to college in England and I went to law school in the United States. And so when I was going to school in Russia, nobody cared about my individual opinions on the subject. They just wanted to make sure that I read all of the books that existed on the topic and that I could regurgitate what other much smarter people than me said about this. Then when I went to college in England.
Sorry, can I pause you there? Any positives from that approach? I mean, Russia generates a lot of really smart people. So is there anything in that approach that is good? Or was the whole thing very stifling and very, I don't know, I mean, clearly impersonal, but like any benefit from it or no? You can say no.
I think it's a philosophical question, and it really, there's no yes or no answer to it because it depends on which area you're looking at. If you're looking at sciences, if you're looking at math, physics, chemistry.
These harder things, these harder, more.
But also they're factual. So the fact that you're able to study material at high volumes and regurgitate it well is probably a good thing because you're not expected to exercise your independent judgment, so to speak.
Creative outlet or something, yeah.
Exactly, you got it. Whereas if you're talking about literature, history, philosophy, more amorphous subject matter, then just the ability to regurgitate what someone else stated on the subject is not entirely helpful.
Right.
That's just my kind of perception of that.
Yeah,
Whereas
that makes sense.
Yeah, what struck me in England in college was I tried to use the approach that I was accustomed to in my first paper that I wrote for college, just to be told, I don't care what everybody else had said on the subject. It's you, Elena Kohn, that I want to hear what you specifically think about it. And that was a really interesting moment for me. I hadn't ever been asked that question before. And so I didn't realize my opinion and my thoughts and my perception of a certain subject actually mattered.
This is going to sound like a stupid question, but buckle up. We're just getting started here.
The only stupid question is the one not asked.
Okay, well, now you got me. You gave me carte blanche now. Did you feel like you had opinions and they just were unearthed? And like you had opinions about the things you were learning, you know, whatever, even in the context of that paper that you felt just didn't really apply there? Or was that like an atrophied muscle that just hadn't really been developed and you hadn't really thought to form your own opinions? Like, was them saying, I don't care what those other people think, I care what you think? Was it something like, okay, well, here, you know, you're dumping out what you think? Or was it like, I don't know what I think, I haven't even been thinking about what I think?
It's like a muscle that if you don't train it, if you don't exercise it often, it atrophies. So I didn't know how to come up with my own thoughts on the topic. I could tell them, well, this and this wonderful mind has said that on the topic. Or, and I also read this person and this person and that person. But what do I actually think on the matter? So that was an eye-opening experience for me. And
was it freeing or scary? Was it a freeing experience or was it a scary experience? Or something else, you know?
It was a little scary at first, just because it was new and not something I had done before. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you become at it. And I think it really develops you as an individual and as a person. And I think it's critical for the Western world that we do have individuals who are able to read different kinds of sources and come up with their own opinion on the matter. Right. It's huge for our democracy.
Okay, so tell me some more about this. So we talked about the first school of thought. You have the second school of thought, which was an eye-opening experience for you to realize, like, oh, I have this sort of muscle of my own thoughts, my own opinions that I need to be incorporating in this. What else around that second school of thought was interesting and eye-opening?
First of all, you know, if you grow up in a totalitarian regime, which the Soviet Union was, the success of the regime depends on the control of information, access to information. And so history gets interpreted in a certain way to benefit the leading party line. And the way I was taught history was entirely different than what I started to hear
Really?
in college in England. I will give you an example. So, World War II is called the Great Patriotic War in the Soviet Union. That's the number one huge difference. It's our Great Patriotic War versus World War II. It's as if the rest of the world doesn't really exist. The focus zooms in on your own nation immediately. And then history is interpreted in a way that glosses over some of the moments that led to Germany's invading the Soviet Union, specifically the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, where the Soviet Union and Hitler actually agreed in 1939 to divide Europe. That fact is never mentioned, was never mentioned to me. And so
So what was that like? I mean, what was that like? Were you just like questioning everything then?
yes, it does things to your mind where you start questioning everything that you basically took for granted growing up.
Totally.
All of it is gone. And so you have a void and you just, well, at least the effect it had on me is it had me start reading history all over again, different sources, different countries, different authors. It made me question at the time, why did the Baltic countries had a very suspicious attitude towards everyone who would come from Russia? I started reading why. Because the Soviet Union discriminated against Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, because people were murdered in those countries by the Soviet Union regime. All of these things I didn't even know were happening when I was growing up. So that was extremely interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting though. I mean, was it scary to learn that? Or was it
Yeah,
like
life
what
is
was that
scary in
feeling like? I
general.
can't even imagine. What'd you say?
I think that life is scary in general. And as we grow, we see more and more scary things, but we become better at handling it.
Yeah. But also that perspective you have is a very unique perspective because most people in the United States don't have that kind of perspective where they were taught things one way and they had to build these other muscles. And, you know, you really have you have a deep understanding of both of these vantage points. You know, the corollary of it or like the metaphor for it being the Great Patriotic War versus the World War II. Those are two very different frames of the world and of history and of looking at things and so forth. Uh, it's just so interesting.
So if I may continue with the first school
Please.
of thought, the second school of
Yes, yes,
thought,
yes.
and then I came to the US and I went to law school here. And I remember reading constitutional law, going back to the creation of our country and our judicial system. And I was so impressed. I was so fascinated. And, you know, those cases we read in law school, they're long, they're 40 to 50 pages each. And oftentimes, you know, students don't really read all of them. But I read every single one of them, every single page. I stayed up all night. I would wake up my poor husband in the middle of the night to tell him, can you imagine Marbury versus Madison? It is emphatically the province of the courts to tell what the law is. My poor husband. I don't even know how that didn't end in divorce, but I was just so fascinated to know everything or to learn about, you know, the different branches, the separation of powers, the checks and balances that we have here, especially given my background, especially coming from the Soviet Union where courts were a sham, where they would just follow the party line. And so, yes, it was incredible. And the third school of thought that I experienced in law school totally kind of altered my mind and taught me in a way of thinking as a lawyer would, which is the IRAC model, right? What is the issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion? So it taught me to write in a very organized and logical way. So it was a culmination of all the previous schools of thought in terms of, can I read a lot of material and regurgitate it?
Yeah.
Yes. What is my opinion on the topic? I can now
The
do that.
analysis.
And it
Yeah.
really helps with the IRAC model of analysis. What is the issue? What is the rule? what is the analysis, meaning what did other clever people in case law and judges say on the topic? And C, conclusion, what is my personal opinion, knowing what the rule is, what the issue is, what the analysis is. What do I, Elena Kohn, as legal counsel, think about it, and what can I recommend in this instance?
So that seems like that was a very empowering journey for you.
I think so, yes.
As you were, absorbing all of that information in law school and reading this constitutional stuff and these cases, what was really sticking out to you? What was really, you referenced the case, which I'm not familiar with, that you woke your husband up with. So like, I'm sure there were multiple things like that where, like, if you're waking somebody up, you're very excited about something. Like, what were the types of things you were so excited about? Was it the sort of justice? Was it the like pure application of the accountability that rule should sort of cast across decisions that maybe weren't considered in the writing of that rule? Like, what was really animating to you?
In this specific case, it was the precursor to deciding that there is in fact a separation of powers, and it's really incumbent upon the courts to tell what the law is. So it's not going to be any other branch, but it's going to be justices and judges who will tell what the law is. And so what was striking to me is the independence of the judicial system and how it was established, and that it wasn't a given, Nick, that we had to fight for it in this country, and that we have to protect it to this day.
Right.
And honestly, democracy is very fragile. So like compliance, where it's incumbent upon each and every one of us, similarly with democracy, in my opinion, it's incumbent upon each of us to make sure we preserve it, because it's fragile and it's precious and it's worth fighting for.
Was your journey into law kind of an inevitability, or was there something that happened when you were in England or when you were in the Soviet Union that you thought, man, I really want to get into this space? Like what magnetized you into law?
I think you are a philosopher, Nick, because when you ask, was it an inevitability? That's a loaded question, right? And who knows? I mean, looking back at my personal experiences and the fact that I saw and witnessed a lawless, chaotic society where I craved to live in a law-abiding society, the total opposite of where I was, yes, that really propelled me towards wanting to become an attorney. Did I ever dream of leaving the Soviet Union and then Russia? No. I never thought that, yes, I want to be an attorney specifically in the United States. But, one thing came after another, and here I am. And I couldn't be happier with all the choices and all of the events that took place leading up to it.
Yeah, I can tell you kind of exude that. Okay, so you get out of law school. What's the next phase?
So I went to a law firm that was considered a big law firm. So I was fortunate enough to have been selected first to work as a summer associate there, and later to work as a associate attorney practicing healthcare law and corporate law. So I got to see incredible individuals who had decades of experience in the highly niche, specialized areas of law, who could really teach me in the ways of being a lawyer and counsel.
I mean, being around those kinds of folks at a young age, I mean, you can just learn so much. You can just absorb so much. How did you find that area of law? Was that corporate healthcare law? Was that really interesting?
Yeah, it still is. That's still what I do to this day.
Yeah.
And so, because healthcare regulations change constantly, I keep growing all the time. I never look back. I enjoy it tremendously. And I also enjoy the counseling part of it. While saying no is really simple to do, it's really easy to say, well, healthcare regulations, laws, and statutes say, no, we cannot do this. But that's only one part of it. It's the bare minimum that an attorney can do. And I feel like coming up with alternative compliant avenues and really working well with your operators, your business people to say, first of all, that's a really exciting initiative that you're thinking about. While doing it this way could present challenges, did you think about doing it instead in this way? And here are some other ways that I can think of that we can achieve a similar outcome with. And so really creating that partnership that leads towards compliant outcomes is what I'm passionate about. And honestly, just passionate about healthcare in general, because it's as close to patient care as I, as an attorney, can get to. And just hearing patient stories and seeing our dedicated physicians, nurses, surgical techs, you name it, anyone who has any kind of contact with patients in my organization, they're all inspiring people. They all want to make sure that our patients are cared for to the highest extent possible. So that inspires me.
Well, you inspire me because, it's interesting. People who get inspired are just so inspiring. That's like a pattern I've seen. And it's so inspiring that you had this experience with your mother that was very tragic and you witnessed that sort of apathy firsthand. And like, you're actually doing something about it. You found yourself, you directed your career path into a space where you as an attorney can get as close as you can to patient care and make sure that justice is being served, so to speak. I mean, it's really an inspiring thing. I love that kind of a story.
And in this way, my mother continues to inspire me because I think about her and everything that I do. And actually, I even named my daughter after her.
Wow.
And my mother, even though she was a chemical engineer, which is a highly technical, obviously, profession, she was also a creative and she was a cartoonist in a way. She could draw really well. And that talent is what my daughter has too. So
how crazy.
Yeah,
Imagine. That's so interesting. Wow.
it really is.
Okay, so you are, you're now the, divisional chief legal officer for a hospital system. And you talk about a culture of integrity in the workplace, a workplace that really cares. And something else you said in our pre-call was healthcare with a heart. So let's talk about, let's talk about that in a second. I want to talk about how you moved from that big law firm now into doing, legal and compliance work within a healthcare, organization.
So two minor corrections. I'm associate divisional chief legal officer. I know it's a long title, but my boss will be listening to our podcast, and I want to make sure
that was a little test for you. That was a test. I wanted to see if you would correct me or not. Sorry about that.
And so compliance is not something that I do as part of my job description, but I work very closely with our compliance team. So that's the second thing I wanted to point out. When I was working in that big law firm, by virtue of the separation between a law firm and a client, you don't necessarily become an integral part of a healthcare business or a system. And also when you're in a law firm, I mean, it's common knowledge. It's on a billable hourly rate. And so the clients are very careful about which topics do they reach out to you with. And when you provide advice, it's kind of very finite in nature. So you don't get the back and forth from the client. Oh, actually, I read your memo. I have questions about XYZ. Can we change this? And 2 weeks later, these new issues came up. Can you revise this? Can we work together collaboratively? So there is not a full kind of circle or full life cycle advising. And I always craved that. I wanted to get to the heart of healthcare and be part of the operations. And so I was on a secondment to a firm's client. I was working for them directly on site, and they realized we had a really good rapport. I was getting along with the general counsel and the chief financial officer, and it made more sense for them to employ me directly versus paying the law firm for my time while I was there. So that's how my first in-house opportunity came about. and I went to work for that client. And then my subsequent healthcare opportunities were always for healthcare companies, and they always came from relationships. It was never a cold call from a recruiter. Instead, it was always an operator or a business person that I worked with who went to a different organization and they were looking for legal counsel or establishing a legal function, and they would always reach back out to me. AdventHealth is an exception because I never worked for a hospital system prior, and I really wanted to round out my legal career to be able to say, yes, I worked on the provider physician side, but I have also worked on the hospital system side, and I understand both perspectives. So that's why I approached AdventHealth myself.
And what's been surprising about moving from provider to, health to hospital system side? Like, what's been some of the surprises? What's been interesting about this rounding out of your experience that you've attained?
So excellent question again. Physician practices tend to be smaller in size, whereas AdventHealth, as you might know, it's a large organization. We just celebrated hiring, making sure we have 100,000 employees across multiple states. We have multiple hospitals and physician practices and any kind of delivery system that you can think of. AdventHealth does it. And so while the size of the organization is massive, at the core is the mission of, extending the healing ministry of Christ and delivering whole person care. And what do they mean by it? Whole person means body, mind, spirit. So regardless of what a person does on the floor, if they're a tech, if they're environmental services, if they're a nurse, if they're a physician, they always have that mission in mind. And so they're helping patients feel whole, because there is a spiritual component to any kind of disease or illness, or the way that the patient feels all alone when, they learn about a sad diagnosis, for example. So it's important not to underestimate the humanity, the spirituality element to all of it. And while the company is so huge, to your point, like, what is so different? The mission still remains. And I found that, and I still find it inspiring, fascinating. It's what drives every single one of these 100,000 employees. So I think that's really cool.
Okay. So let's get to that thing, this like culture of integrity in the workplace that really cares. You kind of alluded it. You just kind of alluded to it a bit. The fact that all the people, regardless of level or function, they have this mission in mind. So what does like healthcare with a heart mean to you, and how does that end up intersecting with the culture of integrity that is built on this foundation of accountability?
From what I can see, not speaking as an official representative on AdventHealth branding, culture, or anything like that, from my personal experience working for the organization, our leaders are really not afraid of showing vulnerabilities. They're not afraid of sharing personal stories of hardship that they overcame. And I think what it does, it's powerful. It shows everyone that we're all human and we're approachable. And I think for purposes of compliance and integrity, that's key, because you want to have leaders who are approachable, who you can reach out to, regardless of your position within an organization, to say, I'm seeing this issue happening. I don't think that's right. Can you help me look into it? So that's healthcare in a company with a heart. You're unafraid of showing up fully with your humanity. And that's what I see. And then I actually spoke to our really inspiring compliance leader. She's called Rebecca Rule. Right before this call, to do my homework, I told her, Rebecca, Nick is going to ask me this question most likely. So if he asks me, what do you think is the strength of our compliance program within AdventHealth? And she said, and I took some notes. So she said, we speak in more common language so that people know who to go to. That's important. And of course, understanding that it's everyone's responsibility. Compliance is everyone's responsibility. And it's 100,000 employees in multiple states. So it's really, really hard in a way to make sure that that message is understood by every single person. And so what they do, Rebecca and her team, is they travel to all of the facilities. There's a compliance week every year in the fall, and they travel to at least 80% of the facilities to be boots on the ground there to show the face of compliance. And I think that's inspiring that they do that. It's a huge effort.
Well, yeah, and there's a certain authenticity that comes along with that. Just the desire to do that, like just doing that is sort of proof of an authentic drive to build this genuine connection and carry forward the vulnerability that you kind of alluded to at the executive level or at the leadership level to the, boots on the ground, so to speak. I think that's such a gap in a lot of compliance programs and a lot of legal functions where there's not the level of approachability that participants of those departments would like, which obviously makes it harder for them to do their job. I mean, if you're brought into an issue after, it's already a fire versus you coming in earlier, you can't, you have to react instead of respond or something like that. So I think that is really inspiring. But how much of that battle, quote unquote, is determined by just the quote unquote tone from the top, the leadership vulnerability, as opposed to just in your estimation, as opposed to like the individual interactions that people have? Like, what do you think the approachability hinges on? Is it the sort of meta macro kind of culture, or is it the individual quote unquote culture that is established on like individual interactions?
And I think it's all important. I don't think one is more important than the other, because if you have vulnerable, approachable leaders at the top, but the boots on the ground leader is not approachable, well, that's not going to work. So it's a concerted effort that each organization probably needs to think about taking to make sure that the kind of leaders that they promote, boots on the ground leaders, your immediate or middle management, that they receive the kind of training and tools and opportunities to learn how to be approachable, how to be that way so that people can reach out to them and know to reach out to them.
So, I mean, you get that was another quiz and you passed it. That is the right answer. Both.
Thank you. Can I get my
letters.
certificate?
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. You're going to get a gold star as well. But how do you encourage people on your team to reinforce that message? Are there strategies that you help to try to model explicitly, or are there things that you want to talk about with folks to make sure, and I'm saying this in the context of, to your point, the sort of macro vulnerability, the macro psychological safety as conveyed from the top of the mountain can be disrupted, I think, disproportionately on the one-to-one interaction. So is it do you solve for that just in terms of who you guys hire, and you're looking for people that kind of quote unquote get it? And or are there additional kind of like guidance that you provide to maintain that sort of culture of approachability once somebody has made it through the interview process? You know what I'm kind of asking here?
I mean, I'm positive it's another test, and I'm not positive
These are all tests.
or not.
These are all quizzes.
I'm not positive I'm going to pass it, but I'm going to try. So my boss, who's the chief legal officer for the entire organization, is extremely thoughtful about his hiring process. And each attorney is handpicked by him and goes through multiple interviews by different leaders within the organization, within the legal department. And so I'm confident that the qualities that you, Nick, so eloquently described are on his list when he vets those potential candidates who apply for positions within AdventHealth. I have observed a very similar, careful approach to hiring within other departments within the organization, including compliance, right? And so I think it's a known fact, perhaps in the industry, that AdventHealth takes a long time to make an offer because they go through so many interviews, but I think it's critical to make sure that you hire for character, skills, and character and integrity. You can develop skills later, but
Yeah.
character and integrity is not something that you can teach. You either have it or you don't. So that's part of it. And then you said, what do you personally do kind of to promote this approachability? Well, I try to be out there and participate in activities and meetings and divisional meetings. And we have something called Team Talk, which is something that's pre-recorded and pushed out to divisions once a week. And it's kind of like a news update internal news update that goes to the organization. And most recently, I was featured in it playing the piano for Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I invited our film crew to my home, and I had them meet my daughter, and my daughter and I performed a piano duet. So as approachable as it gets, Nick.
Yeah, that's pretty approachable. You let him into the house. Wow. So I want to make sure that we spend a little time talking about this cool book that you wrote, Women in Law, Discovering the True Meaning of Success. Tell me about what motivated you to write that, how that whole thing came about, and what the impact has been both on your life and on others' lives, because you've just gotten so much phenomenal feedback from that book.
Thank you so much, Nick. This book, and I'm showing it for those watching on video.
I forgot to bring my copy in, but yes,
I'm so glad you have one.
Yeah.
I appreciate it very much. The book is called Women in Law, Discovering the True Meaning of Success. And it's an anthology. It was written by 23 women lawyers. I'm one of them. And it was published in early 2022. And what led to it was an article that was published in ABA Journal in June of 2021, where I actually wrote down the quote because it still strikes me as not true. So the quote is, "There's nothing that can derail a career faster than motherhood, and it makes already busy women, lose focus." And the whole article was written in this way.
Just kidding.
Yeah. The article basically, to summarize it, it stated that you have to choose. Either you're a mother or you're a lawyer, and you can't be both. And while there are challenges with, being both a mother and a lawyer, if we're being transparent and honest, becoming a mother has made me a better lawyer because it has taught me compassion and empathy. And it made me a better counselor because it makes me relate to a problem in an entirely different way. And so to say that you can either be a mom or a lawyer is missing the point completely. And these 23 women lawyers in the book Women in Law share very openly their professional career stories and trajectories, and just talking about advice that they would give to somebody who's in college thinking about going to law school, somebody who is in law school, or even in the beginning of their professional legal career. And I was told any kind of career, really. It doesn't have to be legal career. There are some nuggets of wisdom that are applicable to all. And that's what the book is about. All of the proceeds benefit Miss JD, which is a not-for-profit organization that's designed to foster and promote women in law. And it really helps female law students and funds scholarships for undeserved kind of students. So it's a good thing that the book was written. And to your other question, what has been the impact? I have people reach out to me on LinkedIn about the book, about my chapter all the time. And it's across the globe, which is amazing. So I have people reach out to me from India, from Singapore, from Australia, of course, from the US too, because this universal experience of being a mom and a lawyer, it really resonates with people. And so it's just created unique opportunities for connection. And I'm really grateful for that.
What message from your chapter or from the book in general do you hope resonates most with people? Because I think a lot of people got a lot of hope. Like this whole book was kind of an answer to that position that was in the article. So what is the message that you think you want people to resonate with? Um,
So the book is called Women in Law Discovering the True Meaning of Success. And so I think what's important to realize is that there is a societal definition of success when you're thinking of being a lawyer, and that is go to the best law school, get top grades, get a job within the biggest law firm out there, bill many hours, and earn a good salary. That's success. That's kind of like a societal traditional definition of success. But you have to look introspectively and ask yourself, does this work for me? Is this how I define my personal success? Because in the end of the day, sometimes it doesn't necessarily matter what other people think success means. It matters what you yourself and your values are telling you to do. For example, while big law attorneys are inspiring because they're such unique specialists in their niche fields, it comes with a lot of sacrifice on a personal level because a lot of them work weekends and miss out on important family milestones. So you got to ask yourself, am I that kind of person who can put everything else aside and laser focus on my professional career for decades? And some people are. And if they are, it's fantastic. You just need to have the level of self-awareness to ask the right questions of yourself. In the comfort of your own home, in the silence of your own room, when there's no noise, when it's just you and you, to ask those kinds of questions and really determine what works for me, what's important for me, what is it that I need to do in my life to be grounded, to be a whole person. And so I think that's the message I was hoping came across from the chapter.
You know, there's something kind of interesting to that story that you told from that movie, The Irony of Success, where there was sort of a picture of what an apartment was supposed to look like. And over here, everyone's apartment looks different. Everyone's wallpaper looks different. But this other thing that we live in or we try to fill out, which is these criteria for success, if you don't take the time, like you're talking about, to determine it for yourself, then you're kind of living in the same apartment as everybody else. You know, same wallpaper, same couches. And it's almost the illusion of success in a way. You know, you talked about this movie, The Irony of Success, where the guy finds himself in an apartment that looks just like his, with no unique characteristics or none of his individuality in it. If we're not careful, we can find ourselves in someone else's apartment or someone else's definition for success. And that's why I think people like go nuts. And that's why people can make that kind of a statement. You got to pick one or the other. Like, why do you have to pick one or the other, you know?
And it requires each of us to really take the time to look introspectively and decide for ourselves what works for us and what doesn't. Nobody else is going to do the homework for us.
Exactly. But it's interesting, right? Like, you kind of set on this career path and like, it seems very sort of etched in stone of what it's supposed to be. And it's not necessarily supposed to be that. It can be whatever you want it to be, you know?
I know. And I completely agree. And I honestly just think law school really gives people a unique skill set. It makes you think logically, but it doesn't mean that you have to work as a lawyer after graduating law school. It just means you've gotten the skills and the tools, and you can apply those to any industry out there and be anyone. I mean, it's really inspiring in a way.
It is inspiring and it's really freeing. And it's especially freeing, or this is at least from my own experience, it's especially freeing when you realize that like you can just be yourself. You don't have to be this fake version of yourself, or you don't have to be this fake, you know, this artificial thing that you think you need to be in order to fit in, because all the people that like you and like connect with you in real life, they like the real you, you know? And so the sooner we can bring that real person to the four walls of our business or to the interactions with, you know, in the professional setting, I think you end up 10xing your effectiveness. You end up 10xing the relationships you build. You build so much, you know, you build deeper relationships because people kind of feel like they know you and you feel like you know them. There's just so many positive externalities that come from kind of letting go of that armor I'm just saying, like the person that's showing up today is very different than the person who showed up for my first interview at a big accounting firm coming out of college. You know what I'm saying? I was so nervous. I was so artificial, you know. And again, I was trying to be professional, all that kind of stuff. But as you can kind of make your world and your life your own, it's just all the clouds part. It seems that's what it seems to be for me.
Oscar Wilde said, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken, right?
That's it. I love that.
That's it. And honestly, people can sense when we're not being authentic.
100%.
When we're trying to pretend to be somebody else, people know. So there's almost no point in
There's no point.
Yeah.
There's no point in following some checklist of what you're supposed to look like, because to your point, on the subconscious level, people can sniff it out. And oh man, we could go on all day about this. Okay, so this has been a really fun conversation. I always love to wrap up these conversations with, if you could go back in time, what's a piece of advice you wish you could give a younger version of yourself?
What an excellent, deep philosophical question to ask. I would just tell myself, don't be afraid, go forward. It all works out in the end.
See, you know, we spend so much time thinking about the worst case scenario, and that never happens. It never happens. You know what I mean?
That's right.
This was really a lot of fun. People can find your book on Amazon. It comes highly recommended. We're going to be featuring it on our webinar series, the Ethics Verse. We give away books every single week on the Ethics Verse. But thank you so much for coming on, The Ethics Expert. This was really a phenomenal conversation.
Having me, Nick. It's been a pleasure.
See you next time.